Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kanban for Everyone. I'm Colleen Johnson, the CEO of ProKanban.org. I'm very excited today to be joined by Denise Tillis, co-author of Product Operations. We're going to be talking about all things flow and product today. Denise, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
I love seeing the book cover. That's awesome. Thank you.
You see my sticky notes stuck in there, and I have questions all prepared here for you.
Oh, good.
It's going to be fun. I'm really excited to be talking to you about product and product operations specifically today, but I would love to just spend a few minutes talking about Denise. So let's tell the audience a little bit about you.
Sure. So I co-wrote this book with Melissa Perry. I think most of you guys know Melissa Perry. This is how Colleen and I actually connected. Melissa, for those of you guys who don't know, is the author of Escaping the Build Trap. And she and I worked together at her consulting firm and got to know her. We were working with a venture capital company as their center of excellence. And she kept talking about product operations. I'm like, well, tell me what you mean by that. And she explained it. And I'm like, oh, I was doing that like in 2014. And when I was leading a team of product managers at a company called Cision, a B2B SaaS company. When I started there, my sort of CPO was like, do you want to hire a data analyst? And I thought, we can do that? Because I'm used to having to do all of that myself as a product manager. We brought on a data analyst. We ended up hiring someone who was completely overqualified for the role. And she sort of headed up this really mini research and strategy and data team, but it really was the sort of precursor to product operations. And the leverage that this small team gave to my large team of product managers was incredible because we knew our product and we were so close to it. And looking at the data, sometimes you get a little fuzzy in terms of starting to see things sharply with what the data is telling you. And the head of this team and her whole team, they understood the product, but they had enough of an objective removed that they could sort of see opportunities, see potential challenges, things that we might want to test. So it was amazing, a product that they had sort of identified as a potential sort of increase in yield per customer, ended up making $1 million the first year, and it wasn't even on the rate card. It was just kind of a back of pocket product. So I was definitely a firm believer in that. So when Melissa talked to me about, it really helps give the product managers leverage with quantitative data, qualitative data, and process and operating model. I'm like, oh, that's what it is. So started getting more excited about that. And I teach a masterclass now for products labs about product operations. But since 2021, I've been working on my own as a consultant and a coach and advisor for all things product. So product maturity, teams that are thinking about what does it look like to go through a transformation at scale for their product team, and also product operations. And that's been a little more new past 2 years or so, teams wanting to stand up product operations and what do we need to know and how big of a team do we need? Do we need it? How much should we be covering? So, and I also coach leaders, CPOs and VPs of product in this space as well. So I've been fortunate to work with companies like Sam's Club. I helped them stand up a product ops function. Bloomberg, I was a product coach there for 1.5 years, and Athena Health, a number of healthcare companies. So yeah, it's been busy. But interestingly, my major was journalism. So I sort of felt like it all kind of came full circle here with writing the book, which I will never do again.
I'm also a journalism major. That's so funny.
Oh, that's funny. Well, you'll have to write a book, or have you written one, Colleen?
I haven't. I have one I'm working on, though. I'm really excited.
Okay, there you go.
Hopefully this year. This is the year.
Do you feel like you'll never do it again? Because that's how I feel.
Yeah, no, I absolutely feel that way. I go in spurts where I get a lot done and then nothing done. So
yeah,
there's probably something in there to learn, some lessons to learn.
Exactly.
Well, about the product specifically. So for our listeners and those that are joining us today, what would you say, like, how do we sum up what prod ops is? And really, how is it different than what we typically think of when we think of product management?
Right. So I think the simplest way to put it is the difference between product management and product operations is product management makes the decisions, product operations enables those decisions. So there's no offloading or someone taking someone's turf. It's about working together. And I think the folks that do well in product management or product operations have those sort of inclinations toward wanting to solve problems. That makes sense on both sides, but really more for thinking about product managers as the product versus the actual product. And so that's sort of the difference between them. But product operations, just in its highest distillation, is really about helping product managers make better quality and faster decisions. And it's really about helping them focus on what they were hired for, right? So if any good product manager worth their salt, they're hired to help generate revenue. If you have a revenue generating product, or enabling internal tools, working well with cross-functional stakeholders, making sure that you're developing and building out the product and evolving it in a way that makes sense for the business, not writing SQL scripts off the side of your desk just to get data, just to analyze, just to make a decision. So that's the way that in the book we really differentiate that. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, obviously with the Kanban world, so much of what we do is try to leverage data to take action. There was something really specific in the book that you call out here around that, this whole process of leveraging data from a product perspective isn't a one-time event. And that's unfortunately how it happens for a lot of companies, not just from a process perspective or a customer insights kind of perspective, but we tend to gather that data for whatever purpose it's supposed to be giving us, right? And we analyze it and we make a decision, and then it kind of gets buried away and we don't come back to it.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about the importance of making sure that process is ongoing and really providing those insights over time, not just at one point in the product discovery process?
Yeah, that makes sense. And those sort of touch points, if you don't have that data, qualitative or quantitative enabled, it not only happens in planning, but road mapping, annual planning, any sort of prioritization, quarterly business reviews. And it's just kind of like Groundhog Day, right? You are getting ready for a quarterly business review, let's say, and you're running around trying to get information. Oh, this information, the data here doesn't really match up here. Where did we source that? So getting all of that set. You finally get it done. You share it with the team, and then it's time to redo it all over again. The data is as old as it was. So doing that in a manual way, not having that sort of ongoing, steady, sorry to use this word, flow of information, you're just doomed to sort of keep repeating it in that sort of hamster wheel. So you'd be amazed the size and revenue of companies that I work with that don't have any of this enabled.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of opportunity.
There is, and you use the term self-service data, which I really like, right? Because it's exactly that. It's having access to that data all the time, so you can make decisions not just once a quarter or not hoping for the next quarter, right? But it's always having that information available.
Exactly.
Well, let's talk about the 3 pillars. There's kind of 3 pillars in the book that we talk about in terms of product operations. Can you walk us through those?
Yeah. So there are 3, and it's one way of thinking about how to structure a team where you're focused, but don't feel like it's hard and fast the only way. And I think that's one important thing to think about product ops. It's going to look different at every company. It's about where your needs are and what your company's biggest opportunities and gaps are. But the 3 pillars, as we sort of break them out in the book, are the first one is business and data insight. So the quantitative, so product engagement, product health, and revenue. And then the second is qualitative, so UX research, customer market insights. And then the third one is process and practices, operating models, so ways of working. And I think one area that product operations really shows up well is helping people sort of work through how we get things done. So you're not having meetings about how we're going to do the things, you're having meetings about doing the work. And that's where I think people and teams spend a lot of cycles. It's just like, what are the rules of engagement? Who's doing what here? So product operations can kind of just smooth that out and people get to doing the work versus talking about it.
Yeah. And that's a big part of what we focus on from a Kanban perspective too, right? Of the quickest way for us to learn is to get something delivered, not to spend hours trying to plan it out or estimate the work, right? Putting it out
totally.
This way we're going to figure out if we're on track or not. Well, let's talk a little bit about that process and practices side of things. So I think right now we're seeing a big shift in the Agile space of like, I guess maybe questioning value add activities and whether or not they're helping us deliver the right thing on time. So when you think about the processes described in the book and the term just enough processes used, I was very excited about that because I was like, that's what we want too. Where do you see current practices or some Agile practices that or maybe at odds with that thinking?
Just enough. I mean, I think that a lot of the sort of agile coaches that I've worked with are really pragmatic and not dogmatic about how we sort of support teams to deliver continuously and deliver value. So I wouldn't say that I see that a lot, but challenges where I have seen it is that sort of dogmatic, paint by numbers type of agile situation. And I think when folks are more adaptive and can sort of customize the, capability to what the team needs, I think that's where it shows up the most successfully.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I
Yeah.
think in the book, there's a whole section on getting rid of annual planning, which I was also super excited about because I think this is right where we spend so much time and money trying to plan what we're going to be doing so far in advance that we almost lock ourselves out of the ability to fold feedback in sooner.
That's true.
Can you share a little bit about some of the experiences you've had or organizations where you've seen where they've successfully moved away from annual planning? Because I think for a lot of people, they're like, it's impossible. We have to. And what about the budget?
Well, that's the thing. It's almost diametrically opposed needs because understandably, the finance team needs to have that sort of predictable understanding of what you need and then thinking about how they're going to capitalize those costs. You have that versus we need to be flexible. We need to be agile. We need to, not think more than a quarter ahead. So it's kind of at opposing moments there. So I understand the need for finance and they can't just kind of keep it agile and do it quarter to quarter. I get that. So how do we work with them, right? Versus at odds. I'll be honest, a lot of companies I work with are still doing annual planning.
Yeah.
And there is a company I'm doing a little bit of work with. They're a crypto company. They're a little more, flexible, fluid. They seem to be doing almost monthly planning. So I think it kind of depends. But, if you're a larger enterprise type of company, I think you're going to be hard pressed to move away from that. But what do you think?
Well, it's interesting hearing you say that there's a crypto company that's able to kind of shift to monthly, because I think we would think of that probably as a highly regulated. There's a lot of regulation there that they have to uphold.
Right. Good point. Yeah.
Top of, but that's probably why, right? It's giving them the opportunity to reprioritize things as they change or as markets and demands change for that organization.
Regulations. Exactly.
Yeah. In the book, you talk about the concept of these roadmaps being almost like a different roadmap for a different audience. And that really resonated with me too, because I think when we think about roadmaps, it's like we often see an organization spend all that time coming up with their annual plan or their annual roadmap.
Right.
It's the same roadmap for everyone. And I thought that was, it was like, it seems really obvious, but it's not what we often see in practice. And when we start thinking about how we can apply Kanban and flow to those things, it's kind of almost the same levels you might have of your Kanban system, right? Of like what's coming next through the flow, what are we working on next? And then not over planning so that you're just pulling enough based off capacity. So I think that's
exactly.
Really, it's often
if you think about it, if you've got that Kanban set up the way you want, you don't have sales poking in there, right?
Yeah.
And they don't want to see it. They don't want to know how the sausage is being made. They want to know when the sausage is ready to sell, right? Maybe a little bit of a preview or a taste. So that I think sort of speaks to the need for that sort of different audience, different view. And some of the tools out today, I think, are pretty good at sort of being able to help you slice different expressions of value. Right. But a lot of companies I work with are still doing very detailed roadmaps in PowerPoint. And with any little change, it's like, they're in there for 2 days. So there's got to be a happy medium.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually just launched our product class, and that's one of the activities we do in there is we kind of take a traditional roadmap and tip it sideways in some regards to say, like, here's how we would normally do this from a Gantt chart perspective. But if you think about this from a pull-based Kanban system, it's almost like, or that concept of now, next, later, if that's what your organization uses, you're starting to see what things are closest to being done or learn, what are we closest to learning or getting feedback from our customers on and what's next on deck. So I like that. I like the thinking there of the different levels of the roadmaps too, and different audiences. It ties nicely with the same considerations you'd have for designing out your Kanban systems. So let's talk a little bit about this concept of planning and connection to strategy, because that was the other thing that I felt like seemed very similar to one of the things that, or some of the thinking behind how you can use different levels of Kanban systems to see how
Hmm.
you connects back up to strategy. I
Hmm.
think one of the things I see so many organizations struggle with, just like annual planning, I suppose, but they spend all this time developing OKRs or strategic themes or objectives, whatever names you want to attach to them,
Right.
and then they get put into one system, and then we go off and execute a completely different set of work that's unrelated, right? And at the end
Right.
of the year when we go to check in, it's like, well, we got all this stuff done, but none of it's related to those things that we said were important a year ago. Can you talk a little bit about that connection back to the work to the strategy?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think people have the best of intentions. They maybe have read a book or read like, Measure What Matters, John Doerr, sort of godfather of OKRs, and they're like super inspired. But I went through this. A company I worked at, they got really excited about implementing OKRs and actually hired a consultant to help us go through creating OKRs. And we did that, spent a lot of money, and then everyone just kind of got shelved. And we're sort of going through leadership team level updates. It's like, well, shouldn't we be sort of reporting from the OKRs? No, we want to look at these. And just like you said, it was almost a academic exercise in a sense. So that's where I think product operations helps, because not only can they help support the team, help support product, but the entire company on, how do we do this? What are the motions? What are the cadences to check in on it? And then you set them, but you can't forget them. They need tending and weeding, and product operations can really help there. And not get to the point where we set them in January and then come November, we're like, oh, but monthly or quarterly or whatever, let's understand, is this still within our strategy, or do we sort of need to recast this? You don't want to sort of keep careening from one to another, but if it's not making sense and maybe your company has had a strategic shift, what does success look like now? I think in the end, where there's OKRs, KPIs, whatever, it's just long as you understand what success will look like, what failure might look like, and how to sort of pull the levers to adjust that. I think you're in good shape. A lot of companies, I think, still struggle to even do that, to define even for a feature what that looks like. It's more about hitting the bell and we got it done and next.
Yep.
You probably don't see that anywhere.
That all the time. All the time. Well, and I think, when we think about, one of the things we really try to focus on when we're thinking about really scaling Kanban systems is how to create that visibility. So it's not necessarily to say you should be working on this OKR KPI or you shouldn't be. It's really to have a conversation and be able to say, hey, it looks like we have a dozen features in progress right now, and only 2 of them are connected to any of the KPIs we said were important.
Right.
And is that okay? Maybe it is. Maybe we want to switch gears, but it's really just a trigger to have that conversation sooner, right? Before the work is done, before the investment has happened. Is this still the most important thing for us?
Right. Or it's also a good sort of forcing function to realize, that your roadmap may be getting hijacked by customer commits, sales debt. And for those of you guys who don't know what I mean, is things that sales says they absolutely have to have to make a sale. And your roadmap may be here, and what they're requesting is this way. So how many of these do you support, as I said, till you get to the end of the year and look at the roadmap and you delivered on 30%?
Yeah. Well, and that's great. So let's talk a little bit about that concept, right? You get all these requests from different parts of the organization, right? Sales is often a huge one, customer service. There's all these different inputs into the product org. It's a very hard role, and every business I've been in, right? Product, I feel like doesn't get the respect it deserves, because it's a hard function where it's like you need to make everybody happy and you're never going to make anyone happy.
Right. So, exactly.
When you think about how, quant and qual data can help drive those conversations, where do you see that coming in to help kind of steer the ship and help figure out what to work on next?
Right. And, there's been a lot of conversation about prioritization frameworks lately, and I'm not wedded to one. If there's one that works for you, fantastic. But I invariably see companies kind of like trying to jimmy their way into rice, or if they're doing SAFe, they're doing WSJF. And in the end, it's kind of like a roadmap. It's just a communication tool, this prioritization framework, however, cost of delay, however you want to do that. But it's about making sure you have alignment with the stakeholders and they're bought into like, here are the sort of criteria that we're going to judge any sort of new potential opportunity against, and helping guard against the yes and, but having the difficult conversations of either or. And I think that's where companies run into trouble, where it's like, well, we'll just add it in. And it's like, well, we don't magically get more capacity. So something's going to end up not happening or happening poorly later on. So that's where I think it makes sense. And in terms of whatever framework you're using, you want to have data at your fingertips to be able to understand, 10% of our, let's say, weighted scoring is towards churn reduction. So what's our churn at right now? Do you have to wait 5 days to get that out of Salesforce? You know what I mean? So you want to have these things sort of readily available. If it's something that's not core and central to our business model, is there a way to measure that, or a way to sort of model out what that could look like? And I see that at companies where things kind of shiny objects come out of left field. And one of their criteria in their weighted scoring was like, is this core to our business? Our core competency. So that really helps in terms of quantifying that. And then in terms of qualitative data, that sort of helps bring out the humanity of it and the feedback of people's pain points or opportunities. So paired together, it's quite powerful. But that's where I see the opportunity, and that everybody has access to, not just, product very secretively, but however we're measuring it, everybody has access to the same, using the same data. So we're all sort of singing from the same book.
Yeah. And the book, if you haven't read it, for those of you listening, the book does offer a lot of different tool recommendations for all these different types of data gathering and being able to have that self-service data that we talked about at the beginning. So I highly recommend it for that. I think a lot of books in this space tend to shy away from talking about tools, but that's always the next question we get, right? Of how do I do this? And a lot of times I don't get to pick my tools. So how do I do this with the tools I'm given?
Right.
And that's an important element of that too.
Yeah. And it's important to say, tools are not the sort of magic bullet. And, I can see that at times. We're like, well, we just need a road mapping tool. I'm like, you can kind of do what you need to with Google Sheets, but, and it's a good way to do a proof of concept before you actually really understand what you need. And that helps you with the analysis if you do go to a tool. I remember using RoadMonk like 5 years ago, and I spent more time fighting with it than getting any value out of it. And I just kept going back and trying to figure it out. It's like, this isn't working. So what's sort of your threshold of trying to adapt to it versus, what's the inflection point of it not giving you leverage? So it's a challenge.
Well, and then in the book, there's also a lot of, I don't want to say like the people side of product operations, right? So there are some new, not necessarily new roles or new types of roles, but maybe new inside product, right? So like you talked about data analytics, and that tends to be, I think, part of where things break down is it's usually like you can borrow somebody from the data analytics team for a week to get the data you need, but then they have to go back and do other work.
Right.
So what we're talking about a lot in the book, right? And what you and Melissa talked through is this concept of building out a product team where you have the people you need dedicated to this function. When you think about how this is playing out in the real world now, right? A lot of companies are cutting costs, they're cutting roles left and right.
Yeah.
Are you seeing organizations that are willing to spend the money on those positions?
It's interesting. It's a way of thinking about leveraging what you've already spent money on.
Yeah.
And I think companies that have that point of view get it. So let's say that you had a huge UX research team and they got laid off. But what elements are there and what can we sort of unlock to make sure everybody has access to them? That's where product ops and a data analyst can kind of pull the data, understand sort of through a product lens what would be relevant for the product managers in providing that. So to me, it feels like the most valuable role to have, because you don't have to generate the insights, quantitative or qualitative. It's about, making sure that you're pulling those in. And that's where I see a lot of blockage at companies where they've got teams doing this, but product isn't taking advantage of it. So why?
Yep.
Yeah. But to answer your question, I don't know that I'm seeing it that way. I spoke at a conference last month for PLA, the Product Ops Summit, And I spoke about leaner times, why product operations matters more than ever. And what got me sort of thinking about that was the Spotify memo from December that Daniel Ek, the CEO, wrote. And I'm reading, and it's like, people doing work around the work. I'm like, he means us.
Yeah.
And probably Agile folks as well.
Yep.
And I kind of reread it again. I'm like, oh, that's what it means. That's what it means. So to what point did he think that that was sort of getting in the way? And has he thought about outcomes versus outputs and getting back to the build trap if you're just building versus thinking about what you're building? So I'm really interested to see how that sort of swings back. But I think there's a lot product ops and the Agile community can be doing in terms of clarifying and making sure we're sort of promoting the value that we bring. And, at this conference, I did some research and it showed that Agile is a huge business and it's not going away. It was like 22 billion in 2022, and it's going to be 132 billion in 8 years. So it's not going away. But how do we make sure people sort of understand what we all do and the sort of different ways we bring value?
I think that's really important. It's one of the things, we've been spending a lot of energy right now from a ProKanban perspective initially, specifically working with Scrum Masters and trying to help them understand how to use flow metrics to help their teams navigate what's most important to focus on, not just from a delivery perspective, but from a process perspective. And it's exactly that, right? It's like, how do you take data? It's all the same kind of concepts here applied to a different part of the business, essentially. But how do we take that data and use that data to show where we're improving or not improving, so we can make better decisions and be more efficient with our time? Because really, it's like if the organizations are cutting roles or spreading people across multiple roles, it's another thing I think we're seeing more of right now as they're trying to run leaner. It's like, well, then we need to be more efficient with our time and how we're working with the teams as well. So.
Yeah, but you'd be amazed. Some companies I'll chat with, they want to talk about product operations. They've got like loads of Agile coaches and Scrum Masters and product coaches. And some companies are like throwing all of these support roles in there. So it's either like feast or famine.
Yeah. Well, so that's a question I have too. When you think about kind of where things are going, right? I think this is in Marty Kagan's book too. I think a lot of organizations have overhired a lot of these roles, whether it's
everywhere, product, Agile,
right?
Everything.
Some of that, I think, we can point to SAFe a little bit with I would say it's like an obfuscation of products, of what product is supposed to be, right? There's all these layers between an Epic owner and a product manager and a product owner, like just really diluting what they're supposed to be doing and understanding what the most important problems are to solve for customers.
Right.
So where do you see those roles going next? Do you think there's opportunities for that to get folded into product operations in some way? Or do you think that
product owners?
Yeah. Do you think it'll go away?
No. I mean, I'm a big fan of it folding into product management, because to me, in terms of from a product management point of view, it starts feeling like telephone. I'm talking to customers, you're doing the delivery, but where's the through line of understanding all of that as you sort of get ready to deliver something? And it seems just invariably there's going to be a disconnect. And then why does this person only focus on delivery? Wouldn't it make sense for them to have a strategic aspect? And I think if you fold that into product management and you have the product operations support, you're there. I think the product manager should have that connectivity to the delivery aspect as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I'm curious too. Some organizations, it seems like, separate those functions out almost based off of the individual's experience. So I see like more junior folks in a product owner role and more senior folks in a product management role. But then it's exactly what you said. It's this game of telephone of the product manager owning some part of understanding customers and strategy and budget, translating that into low-level team requirements that the product owner is then left to pick up, which feels unfair, I guess. Like if you're trying to become a product manager, it's like you're not getting exposure to the right activities if all you're doing is focusing on backlog management.
Right. But you think about it, and I'm sure I'm really boiling this down way too far, but it's just like throwing it over the fence and let me know when it's ready.
Yeah.
Good product managers are working side by side with product owners, but I'm starting to see that title almost just interchangeable too, like you said, as junior versus more experienced. And I'll get and work with a company like, well, they're all called product owners, but they're product managers. I'm like, why are we calling them product owners? I try not to get caught up in the semantics. When I work with companies, I just want to make sure, like, where are we going? Where do we see the opportunities, and where's the value we can unlock versus you're doing safe, that's wrong. You're a product owner, that's wrong. And I want to sort of see, like, how do we just get this moving in the right way? Semantics are less important.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, meet people where they are and keep it simple,
Exactly.
right? We'll focus on how do we keep all of this, like you said, just enough process, right? It should be simple and easy to implement. So I saw Maria just posted an invitation for you to start adding any comments or questions in the chat here, and we'll get to those in about 10 minutes or so. I'm curious too, for Denise, with the consulting work that you do in the organizations that you work with, what is the biggest barrier to them being successful in implementing product operations?
Well, procurement came to mind. But, I think it's about introducing a function that people still don't know what it is. So not only do they have to sell their own teams, they have to sell the, sort of cross-functional teams or leadership teams. When I worked with Sam's Club, their CPO was brilliant at it. He really distilled it, brought it to the CEO, and she's like, oh yeah, totally makes sense. Go do it. And, he knew how to package it, and she gave him the absolute freedom to figure out how he wanted to structure this. So if you have a good relationship with whoever the sort of decision maker is, that always helps. But thinking about the biggest pain points of your company and what good could look like. And if the examples we have in the book, the case studies we have from Amplitude, Fidelity, Oscar Health, Athena Health, I feel like I'm missing one, Stripe, Uber, if you have those case studies to remember, like, oh, and the person who started product operations at Uber and Stripe, Blake Samick, is now at OpenAI and created a product ops team. So people are like, oh, product ops isn't, well, OpenAI is doing it. Seems like they see value in it. So, it's different levels of startup and enterprise. So it really can add leverage to a lot of companies. But the question you asked is, what's the biggest challenge in implementing?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's the understanding. So that was another reason Melissa and I wrote the book, because people are like, how do I convince my boss? How do I explain to them what it is? So like, here you go. It's a book right there. There's hopefully a little bit of credibility, right? Someone's name on it, Melissa, who's well-known in the industry. She was talking about it during the Escaping the Build Trap, but, and showing what other companies do. And when I speak to, organizations that are thinking about products, that's one of the things I sort of highlight. All of these amazing companies have product operations. Like, oh, we're finance, they have it. Oh, or we're, a B2B, oh, they have it. So if you can sort of show them, at least to get sort of break the ice, that definitely helps. And then also showing them, you've got this challenge, here's how it might be solved. You have this opportunity, here's how product operations might be able to add more leverage. So it really is about helping them understand at a high level what it means, highlighting the opportunities, highlighting the deficits at the company, and then thinking about, we're not going to boil the ocean. This is sort of the hierarchy. We're going to start here, and then sort of knock them off as we sort of create these proofs of concept and start delivering quick wins.
When you think about the delivery side of things, so the book talks a lot about, pulling all this data together and making good decisions and evaluating whether or not you should make the first investment or continue to make investments in all these different options, basically, of what you could be delivering. What do you see the product manager's role as in the delivery side of things? So once it's in, once it's kind of in being built, right, or getting shipped.
If we're not thinking about safe, you mean?
Yes. Not thinking about safe. Ideal world.
Yeah. I mean, they're involved. They're involved from sort of, what do they say? Farm to table, so to speak. Understanding the opportunity, developing, what that could look like with engineering and your UX partners, and staying involved and making sure that, unblocking things for the, triad, the team, and then making sure that as we're getting ready to deliver, do we have a definition of what success looks like? And this is where I see a lot of teams sort of drop off. It's like, we'll get it, afterwards. But you could have an amazing burst of, success, engagement, money, whatever it is, and you're missing out on measuring that, right? So that's a huge waste opportunity. And it's hard to get people excited about adding event tags and sitting down to talk about what, success looks like, but it's so important. And I think sometimes folks can tend to think, well, if it's not being measured, then I'm not being judged, and I can just kind of keep working under the cover here of darkness. But it benefits everybody. You want to know if it's doing well, if you did no harm, if you're actually, creating value, or, what the sort of breadcrumbs of further enhancement might be. So I think that's part of it as well.
Yeah, I've been part of a few organizations that I think have been really successful in implementing this, and I feel like it started out as something like you described, where the product managers were really championing, the data, both on the front end and on the delivery end of the process, and folding that feedback in and bringing it back to the development teams to say, here's what you built, here's what we're learning, we're going to fold it in. And I feel like, fast forward at that company a couple of years, it got to the point where I feel like the product managers were almost annoyed with some of the dev teams, because they were like, stop asking me for all this data. Like,
the engineering teams wanted the data. Yeah, so that's amazing. But yeah, I get it.
Investing in this doesn't make any sense. Like, I want to see data before I go build this. And, I think it was really neat. It was a good way to kind of really create a strong connection to what they were building and what was getting used or not getting used. And sometimes the answer, I think, can be that it's not getting used. So it's like, how do you bring that back to a team and say, we're going to sunset this, or we're not going to continue to invest in this because it's not delivering what we thought we were going to do? That's a hard message to bring to any team after they've invested a lot of time and energy. And I think data is what's going to make that conversation easier in the end.
Right. It takes the subjectivity out, I think. And anytime you can make it about the numbers, what do they say? The ball doesn't lie, numbers don't lie. And, I think that brings it back to that. And if you can get your engineering team in the habit of appreciating and applying data, amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, that's our goal always too, is how we can leverage the data and teach the teams to ask better questions sooner. And we're really focused right now on this concept of how do we get things as small as possible, so that we can learn as quickly as possible whether or not we're delivering the right thing, right? So small shippable chunks that we can get feedback on quickly. And a lot of times I think that means maybe breaking ties with time boxes, whether that's sprints or what I mean, or PI increments, or whatever thing you're using, right? Sometimes it's maybe you could even get smaller than that. And that's a question I see a lot of organizations, almost like they've implemented agile practices and then they're like, okay, we're doing quarterly PI planning events, and at the end of each one, we're delivering a feature, and that feels like a win. And maybe that is initially, maybe it's a good place to start, but it's like, then if we're trying to make every feature a quarter's worth of work, what if we could learn something in a month? What if we could learn something, like, how can we make all of that stuff smaller so we can learn sooner whether or not we're building the right stuff? So,
well, here's a question for you, because I'm still grappling with this. How do you get a large enterprise company, live or die by the time boxing to sort of let go of that?
Yeah, I think it helps to start with one portfolio that maybe has more flexibility than another portfolio. When I say that, because some areas of the business I think are going to be easier, just like at any part of it, right? A little easier to change than others, or easier to show success with quickly. And for a lot of, I think there's all these parts of the business too, where I feel like they get kind of left out of agile practices because they can't plan work really far in advance, or they can't, they feel like even sprints are too long for them to plan. And so I think when you can start to take different parts of the business that are maybe struggling with the way agile has boxed them in, like you said, pay numbers, right? It's just not working for them. If you can show them that this continuous flow model is going to give them more flexibility with what they're delivering to their customers, whether that's internal customers or external customers, it's going to make them happier, right? It's less overhead, it's less stress, it's like less less planning on the front end and more opportunity to deliver more frequently. And I think once you can find those parts of the business where they're excited about kind of breaking out of what either isn't working for them or isn't helping them deliver, it's a little easier to show success. But I think any practice that you try to shove in when people don't understand why is never going to work, right? I think we've probably seen that in our careers. It's like, why are you making me change the way I'm working? What I was doing was fine. And if that's true, if people feel like what they're doing is working, you're always going to have a hard time changing behavior.
Exactly. That's right. That's exactly right.
Well, I want to open it up for some questions here. So if anyone has questions for Denise about product operations, data insights, whether it's quant or qual data, or how to use those things, or convince your organization to start thinking about how product operations could help be more successful in your product delivery, go ahead and start adding those into the chat. Denise, you mentioned a few conferences that you've been speaking at. Do you have any exciting ones lined up for the summer?
I do. I am speaking at Web Quebec at the end of May. So I'll be excited because this is kind of a different type of audience. Last month I was speaking to, my people, so to speak, and I'd never been around a whole community, with COVID and all that. So it was exciting. But this, I think, will be more of a generalist type of attendee. And also, I think 60% of it is in French. My French is kind of non-existent. So I'll be on the English side stage, but I'll be talking about, what is product ops and why are people so excited about it? And then in June, I'm speaking at an event that ITX is hosting. And they're based in Rochester, New York, and they've got kind of a murderer's row of folks to speak, John Maeda and a couple of other people. So really excited to talk about that. And then a couple of things planned out for the fall. Nothing's definite yet, but it's been nice trying to spread the word and also, meeting other folks in product ops, or also meeting people from the book that I've never actually had the fortune of meeting in person.
Yeah, I saw your post on LinkedIn with the photo. That was an awesome picture. Yeah.
I ran into, we made a date to have a drink, myself and the head of product ops at Athena Health. And, we've been working together on lots of different things for the past 3 years, but had never actually met in person. So it's exciting.
That happens a lot in our community too, because we're global. And so we connect a lot with folks either through events like this or virtual events or even just our Slack community. And I've never met them in person. So it's always great to.
It's kind of cool. It's very cool. It's very cool.
Well, I guess I'll kick off a question for you about the data side of things. And it's a question I get a lot for the flow metrics side, like when we're thinking about delivery metrics or metrics about the work that's in progress. But have you had any experiences where, whether it's quant or qual data, it's been misused in a way?
Oh, yeah.
Can you share a little bit more about that?
I mean, in any situation, right, you can squeeze the data to tell the story you want. So it takes someone who has mastery of it and or a deep understanding of sort of what that or how that data was instrumented to start with. So I've seen lots of things, sort of, solutions needing problems and sort of pushing the data into that. There was one company I worked with, and they came up with an amazing idea for a product. This was a life sciences company, and kept asking, like, who is this for? Who is this for? And they were absolutely specific. And when we did the research, they had no interest. And in fact, they saw this new product as a threat to their livelihood. So not only did they not want to use it, they were like kind of adamantly against it. So we kind of had to go back and retool. But sometimes it takes that and sort of, wait a minute, this might be a great solution, but are we solving anything, or is this just kind of cool for cool's sake? And that was definitely a moment, but that we brought that to life with qualitative insights for sure. But yeah, I think the conversations around sunsetting products, you're saying that the baby's ugly and, we don't need it anymore in the family. And, those are hard conversations. So, I remember at Cision, we were, contemplating whether to sunset something, and we had all of the data, but still sales was like, and it was like, there were literally 5 clients and they didn't want to have the conversation. This is being, we thought about, like, here's some replacement. Here's how, the thought about all of that, but they just did not want to have change. And I get it, because that creates, possibly a conversation that makes the client think, well, what about my other thing? Maybe I should be rethinking my whole mix here. So I understand. So I think it's about having the empathy too, to understand where this sort of objection is coming from. But you guys deal with that all the time.
Yeah. Well, and I guess the other, when you're thinking about that too, Pratik Singh shares an example of how poorly New Coke was received, even though they had done all this research early on.
Right.
And it makes me think too, like what happens in those scenarios where maybe the quant and qual doesn't match, right? Or you're hearing feedback from customers that they want a certain thing, but the insights and the data you're collecting is telling you something different. Have you run into that at all?
Sure. And I think that goes back to sort of that core concept of qualitative insights. Your customer may be telling you they want something, but actually their problem is quite different. And they don't necessarily have the vocabulary to explain what that deep-seated problem is that they need solving. They're sort of grabbing for the thing that's most easily verbalized or communicated. Yeah. So I think that sort of speaks to product folks having, really sharpened user research skills and sort of digging in at the why. But yeah, that definitely see that a lot.
I can imagine, right? Because we get emotional about the things that we use, right? Like, the button changing in your banking app was like, it's going to piss people off. Things like that are going to piss people off. And if you ask them how they feel about it, you're probably going to get potentially a very different answer than gathering that data to really understand the impacts of
exactly. Or you made it through. You don't like the yellow button. You'll get over it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But you can still figure out how to deposit a check. So we're good. Right. It's like, what is really the urgency or the issue that you're feeling?
Totally.
Well, for folks who are interested in learning more about product operations or about how they can start to incorporate more data into either their organization or their role as a product manager, what would be your recommendation for getting started?
Yeah, I mean, the book is really set up as a primer for almost anyone interested. And I went against my own advice when I work with customers and product managers on my team of like, if you serve everyone, you serve no one. But I wanted to think about how could we serve everyone, because the book could be, something that a VP of product hands to their CEO, like just read chapter 2 or whatever, dog ear or something. Someone that is an individual contributor has heard about this and just wants to understand, does this make sense for us, or am I the only one having these problems? And I was chatting with someone at a large investment company, and they're like, it was like you were sitting behind my chair. Like everything that happened, I was like, that's like the best compliment ever. I mean, not that you had those pain points, but it was good that we were able to capture that. So I think that's a key aspect. I do a quarterly masterclass for Products Lab. So if you're brand new to product ops and just trying to figure out, does it make sense? What sort of a really, broad overview, that's a great moment. Great thing to do. It's a half-day class. And I'm also available for conversations if people just want to understand, like, here's the challenges we're thinking about. Would this make sense? Or is there something else we should be doing? Because, I have more of a broad perspective of product management and product ops. It may not be a product ops challenge. It may be a skills or sort of the way you have your team structured, how you're setting strategy. So there's a number of things. And I'm trying to think what else. I think those would be the main things. That would be the main things. And there's a pretty good community on LinkedIn. So I think if you use the product ops hashtag, you'll find some good conversations there as well. But those would be my suggestions.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I want to give everybody one more chance here to ask any questions while we have Denise for a few more minutes. If you've got any questions for her on product operations, product management, data. I think most of our audience speaks data. It's probably our biggest MO as well, is using data to make good decisions. So, well, I don't see anything popping up.
No, I think we solved it and we explained it well.
I know. Denise, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. job on the book. Congratulations.
Thank you
Also,
so
I know
much.
it was a long one in the long in process for you, Melissa. And I really enjoyed all the case studies that you have in there too. It's one of the things I think everybody wants to know when they read anything like this is tell me about how this actually works in an organization and what things they ran into. And that's probably, like you said, where people feel like they can relate the most to stories that feel like their organizations as well. So there's lots of great case studies in the book for folks. If you haven't read it yet, grab a copy. Well, thanks so much, Denise.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful afternoon. We'll talk to you again soon.
You too. Cheers.